So, yeah, welcome everybody. The topic of today's webinar from Think Like a Forest is thriving with complexity. And it's all about embracing that messiness of leadership, of businesses, and organizations. And that's something that we're really deeply unfamiliar with. And it's something that requires somewhat of a shift in the ways of thinking, being, and doing as we move forward. So I'm Sarah Spencer. I am the founder of Think Like a Tree and also co-founder of Think Like a Forest. And Think Like a Tree is predominantly for individuals wanting to learn from living systems about how to design the lives that they want. So it's kind of a personal development program. And then Think Like a Forest is a collaboration with J.K. McQuinn, and that is all about how we can use these regenerative living systems principles for designing the businesses, the organizations, and the communities that we want. So much more to do with an ecosystem approach. So today we're kind of looking at what this has to offer for businesses, but of course, you know, we are individuals within businesses, so there'll be a lot of inspiration for you as individuals, regardless of what your position in an organization or business is. So today we're going to cover, you know, what are some of the complexity issues facing leaders and team members right now? And how does a regenerative approach differ from business as usual? And of course, what a regenerative approach is, because, you know, it is a relatively new concept, certainly in business, and therefore kind of, you know, if you've not come across it before, then that's absolutely fine. That's brilliant. That's what we're aiming to do, bring this to new audiences. So do, you know, feel free to ask any questions sort of at the end of the presentation element of today. And we are assuming no prior knowledge about regenerative practices at all. We're going to explore some of the mindsets and cultures around, you know, shifting from this kind of business as usual into this new kind of regenerative mindset. And thinking about how previously, you know, at the moment we might be really stressed by complexity, and we want to have that transition into thriving with and positively benefiting from the kind of uncertainty and complexity that's inherent in our world. We're going to dig into two of Think Like a Forest's unique nature-inspired frameworks that we've developed in order to work with businesses and organizations, and to how to bring this complexity in a way that feels sort of comfortable to our human desires to have some kind of structure, and you know, that's why we've developed these frameworks, and we'll share those with you today. We'll be looking at how to dive deeper, and there'll be some signposting to our other offerings. So Think Like a Tree and Think Like a Forest, we have a huge amount of free resources. We have a policy of like radical generosity, and of course we do, for people who want to dive deeper and so that we can keep our organization sustainable, have offerings such as our regenerative organization fundamentals program, which is signing up at the moment for the next cohort starting in March. There is an offer associated with that for you, and obviously do feel free to ask questions. I can't guarantee that I'll pick up questions in the chat as we go along. I will try, but certainly there'll be time for more questions at the end. So I want to start off with a quote from Donella Meadows, who was a systems thinker and nature lover from MIT. And And she says, let's face it, the universe is messy. It's non-linear, turbulent, and chaotic. It's dynamic. It spends its time in transient behavior on its way to somewhere else, not in mathematically neat equilibria. It self-organizes and evolves. It creates diversity, not uniformity. That's what makes the world interesting. That's what makes it beautiful. And that's what makes it work. So I don't know about you, but that kind of makes my spine tingle a little bit. Kind of this idea that all this amazing complexity and diversity that's much bigger and huger than myself or anything that I could hope to comprehend is actually what makes the world beautiful and what makes it work. And so what we're doing is trying to understand enough about the basic principles of what makes it work to understand that our business and organizations are living systems so that we can learn from that for ourselves. So what we like to do at the start of all of our sessions is to become present wherever we are, and we can do this in person or we can do this online. So we are kind of all present in the spaces that we are, and we're present together in this kind of virtual space as well. So what I'd invite you to do is to put your feet on the floor, kind of feel the earth or the floor beneath your feet, kind of wiggle around and get comfortable. And then, you know, you can either have a soft gaze at maybe this beautiful photo, or close your eyes, or whatever feels comfortable for you, and just sensing inward for a moment about what's happening with your breath, what's happening with your thoughts. So often, you know, when we come into these spaces, we've got other things that we're bringing from earlier in the day. We've got kind of issues, or JK likes to talk about the tabs that are open in your brain as well as the tabs that are open in your inbox and your web browser. So think about closing all of those down. You know, go into your email and switch it off, and switch your phone on to silent. And at the same time, think about switching those tabs off if you can. Obviously, our brains don't work in that kind of simple way. Thoughts pop up, but that's okay. We can just acknowledge them and then gently say, right now is the time for me to explore this kind of issue of complexity of learning from nature. And I'm going to give it the time that will then benefit me from learning into that. So just say, you know, say the words that you need to become present in this space. Okay, and then when you're ready, then coming back into the room and then having a bit of a stretch or whatever you need to do to sort of get that energy back. Just becoming present so that we can then explore this together. So there is no doubt that we are living in challenging times. So, you know, we need to be having our eyes open to what is happening in the world, and even if we don't want to, then it's, you know, it's coming at us anyway. We are living in complex and challenging times. So, you know, I don't need to explain all of these things necessarily that are in the photos, but you know, we've got everything from the challenges of remote working in business through to the climate crisis, the problems about supply chains. We've got wars going on. We've got, you know, problems and regulations coming up over Brexit and climate. We've got biodiversity crisis. There is no doubt that we are assaulted all of the time by the reality of this complex world that we're living in. And that's coupled with expectations of, you know, how we should work. There's this idea that we should have perpetual growth, this idea of exponential growth, even though we're on a planet of finite resources. And that is also coupled sort of almost paradoxically with this idea that there's a fixed pie, that we should all be competing with each other, that we've got competition between businesses, and that, you know, we've got to remain competitive and put the stress on our teams in order to do so. We've got expectations that emails will be answered, you know, after the end of the working day, that we, you know, put the kids to bed and then get back to our emails. We've got lots of guidelines, best practice, targets that are ever shifting and ever harder. So, you know, we've got this complex world coupled with expectations, and obviously the outcomes don't look very rosy. So for leaders, team members and organizations, you know, I'm not going to go into the stats, because we looked at the stats in detail kind of last week in the webinar about team potential. But, you know, we've got stress, overwhelm, burnout, anxiety, mental health issues, then obviously long-term health conditions. And then, you know, these workplace cultures that, if they're really target driven, they reward long hours, and there's vicious cycles. And then firefighting in the business rather than being proactive. There's you know, kind of uncompetitiveness because of focusing on the wrong targets. So the, you know, this aim to be competitive can often lead to targets that are not helpful overall, and that can move away from the organization's vision. And then there's obviously things like, you know, financial issues, threats to, and ultimately, you know, businesses do fail on a very regular basis. So I'd love to know from you, you know, have a think about, reflect about how this sort of uncertain, volatile and complex world is showing up in your work, organization and business. And of course, you know, when we talk about work, organization and business, then we're also talking about our own personal lives as well, because everything is connected. So feel free to share some of that in the chat. And you know, just have some reflections about that as well. But it would lovely to know. I mean, one of the things that came up last week in the webinar around team potential was the worries about the climate crisis, climate anxiety, ecological anxiety, you know, the stresses that brings. And there are a lot more stresses as well. So if anybody wants to share anything, then that would be fantastic. Okay, well, feel free, because I know it takes time. Oh gosh, Elizabeth's saying we're facing above 40 degree heat at the moment in Perth. Yeah, I mean, that is huge, isn't it? The idea that we get such extreme temperatures. And that, of course, does have a huge knock-on effect to businesses as well as individuals. And you know, some of classical economics is really amazing. They've just totally discounted the idea that such extreme heat is going to have an impact on businesses, and it is just not believable, really. So we've got overwhelm, difficult to find the right direction, firefighting, and lack of long-term vision and strategy, financial stress, lack of resources. So yeah, there's a huge amount of kind of overlap there. Trying to keep up with the challenges and knowing where to target first. That's it. So sometimes it's there for all of us, there are so many different things going on, that it's difficult to know kind of where to start and where to actually kind of place your energy. And it is, that is all part of the process that we're going to talk through today about how to think about where to put your energy. It's often called the polycrisis or polycrises as well, because there's multiple going on at the same time. So regenerative organizations do things differently. And sorry, I'm just reading some more of the chats. Difficult to work on the ground with work and manage people care and finance. Yeah, absolutely. Stressed at traditional cremations and end of life disconnection. Yeah, so Vanessa, who works as a funeral celebrant, absolutely. Hard to remain positive and focus on how we can encourage participants at our sessions that they can make a difference when so much is out of control. Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to dig into some of those kind of feelings and thoughts next. So what I want to do is a bit of a thought experiment with you actually first, and to sort of explore how regenerative organizations approach this idea of complexity differently. So I'd love you to look at this photo that I've got on the screen here. And the instructions are that you're taking a team of maybe 2 or 3 people in your organization out for a meeting in nature in this space. And those are really the instructions. You're in charge of kind of, when you get there, transport is all laid on, you're just going to arrive and you're there with them. And I just want you to sort of dig into now some of the feelings that you have around this away day or away hour or so in nature with your team, and just share with me in the chat what feelings might arise. How might you feel about that? Looking at that photo, the trees in the background and the butterfly and the flowers. So just an invitation as well for everybody who's watching on the replay, that this is the same situation. Do these activities yourself, sitting at home, rather than just being a consumer of a replay. I know we tend to have a bit of a different mindset when we're just watching something on a replay as opposed to being there kind of live, but just invite you to do the same thing. So do share in the chat any kind of connection, part of a greater whole, lightness. Thank you. Yeah, so any other thoughts about the feelings of taking your team out into this space? More relaxed, glad to spend some time together outdoors, connect with our inner selves and slow down, walk in nature. Initial discomfort, I imagine, and maybe some play. Yeah, so there is that balance there. Lovely. Peacefulness. Lovely. Thank you for sharing those. Okay. So I'm going to take you into the second part of the thought experiment, which is this photo. So my instructions to you are very similar. So you're going to take your team on an away day to this space, and I'm going to tell you that it's really overgrown. There's loads of weeds, there's loads of brambles. The space is really overgrown and messy. And you're going to have to make your team happy and comfortable in this space for half a day, and you're in charge. Can I invite you to share in the chat how you feel now about this task that you've been given. And again, inviting you at home to kind of look at the photo and explore, what are the feelings that come up when you're, faced with this task and this these instructions that I've given. Again, rather than thinking about it, what are the feelings that arise? You're in the midst of the brambles, helping to tackle the challenges and fears we face. Wonder where my place in that would be. We've got to be creative to connect with the environment. Flick, I love that. An opportunity for the team to learn about habitat management and how we can do conservation work to create different areas. Leave some brambles, but create some open spaces. Ask people, challenge, but beauty of nature is there. We can still explore. Okay. And I've obviously got a very nature connected group here. So this is all absolutely lovely. So ask people in the group how they feel about where we are at the moment. Resist the temptation to assume how the environment should be. Yeah, absolutely. Fabulous. So essentially, the feelings are different. When we put a different spin on the task. So the difference is not that the environment that you're going to be in is complex, because both of those photos that I showed you are complex living systems. So it's not the complexity of the space that is the issue. The issue is around expectations. So let me just share the next slide. So the difference between this idea of there should be a space, we start to think about how things should be. So what are other people going to expect when they come for a team meeting? They're going to expect somewhere, clean and tidy and ordered, and we might be chopping back those brambles and making a space that other people won't be judging us for. And there's a huge amount of history about how things should be. And what I'm inviting you to do is to kind of explore in your mind this idea that actually it's not the complexity that's the problem, it's our mindsets associated with complexity and what we should be doing, and these ideas of control and order that create the stresses within us. So oh sorry, I've let me share my screen again. So a lot of these mindsets came out of the idea that we are in somehow a clockwork universe. And this came out of thinking, in the 16th century, but it's got its origins long before that as well. But there's this idea that the universe was clockwork that included all of kind of nature and humans as well, and that there were, if you do X and then followed by Y, you get Z in a very predictable way. You can break things down into different elements and study them. And that's effectively what the scientific method does. So breaking things down to study them. And it's a really useful tool. But it isn't actually how the world works. Okay, there are certain parts of Newtonian physics that work in a predictable way, but biology and ecology and also quantum physics don't work in that way. So we have to think about things differently. So this quote from Wes Jackson is great. There's nothing wrong with the reductionist method as long as we don't confuse the method with the way the world really works. So what we're trying to do when we're exploring these issues of complexity is actually see the world as it actually is, rather than having this idea that somehow we need to understand it, control it, break it down. We need to be the humans that are dominating everything that's going on. And this is a really super, super brief summary. We do go into a lot more detail about the history of these mindsets and paradigms in the course. And so how does this relate to organizations and businesses? Well, our organizations are living systems, but we still behave as if they were machines. And that comes out of this kind of long history of this mechanistic mindset and paradigm. And we'll explore that a little bit more in a minute as well in relation to businesses. And if you are interested in diving deep into the mindset of your own organization and team, then do look out for, I'll put it in the follow-up email, a link to our organizational mindset quiz. And there's 6 organizational mindsets that we've identified. And if you do the little quiz, then it comes up with, which mindset is showing up in your team. But more importantly, I think it also then signposts you to some deeper exploration of what these different mindsets are, so you can actually dig deeper rather than it just being a kind of tick box quiz thing. So obviously one of those is the regenerative mindset, and you can explore, what's the difference between these different mindsets in more detail. And do feel free to share that link with your team as well. So what I wanted to also highlight is the difference between simple, complicated and complex problems. And this is one of the activities actually from the course that I just thought, I'll pull this out because it explains it quite simply. So it's a good idea to identify which problems within your organization are complex problems, and any problems that involve people are likely to be complex, and let go of trying to control complex issues. And instead, what we do in regenerative practice is see these as opportunities for new things, new potential to emerge. And often in businesses, we confuse what is actually a complex problem that we can't control and the outcome is not predictable for a complicated problem, because complicated problems have a lot of moving parts. So, you might say putting a rocket on the moon, but equally bringing a product to market, if it's, it could be that is a really complicated problem. But essentially, if you've got a set of resources and materials that you put together in a certain way, the outcome will always be pretty much always predictable of what that's going to look like, even if it's a really complicated thing like a computer or a rocket or a car or whatever. They're complicated, but they're not complex. And often we confuse the two things. And even something as simple as holding a team away day, we often think that we ignore the complexity of that, because we kind of think, oh well, we plan it, we know how it should turn out. But then of course somebody's ill, or the speaker doesn't turn up, or it rains and somebody gets stuck in a flood. There's all these complexities that we can't we might have a plan, but there's so many different changeable variables that the outcome can't be predicted. And if what we do is put a mindset of predictability and control onto a complex problem, then guess what? What we get is stress, overwhelm, and kind of blame and shame when things don't go according to plan and the targets that have been imposed are not met. So Regenerative organizations are different. They align their purpose and actions with nature's patterns and principles. And these are things like healthy growth, adaptability, resilience, collaboration, and diversity. And that's because, like I say, regenerative organizations treat their organizations as ecosystems, not as machines. So these are the principles that we can learn from all healthy ecosystems. And then regenerative organizations create life. So instead of extracting in a traditional kind of money orientated business sense, extract from people and resources and make them into something that can be sold for a profit, then regenerative organizations, whilst money is no doubt part of that process, it's in service to life, not the other way round. And so what we need are some mindset and cultural shifts to be effective regenerative leaders. And that is starting with letting go of feelings of needing to be in control. And kind of like I've hinted before, it's an illusion anyway. So, you're setting yourself up for failure for this idea that you or your, people in your team can be in control of these things all the time. We can let go of blame and shame when things turn out differently. Because it wasn't predictable. Life happens, and we need to trust the power of self-organizing systems, and that's what we see in nature. We don't have these hierarchical systems. We have self-organizing systems where organisms are aligned around a common purpose, and then things kind of happen. We'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. And that just doesn't happen by magic. In an organization, you do have to create the right cultures for them to thrive. And that's partly because we're so used to living in these business as usual kind of mechanistic mindsets that we have to do quite a lot of work to overcome some of the negatives associated with them. As a leader, we like to adopt a guide role rather than a manager role. So instead of sort of telling everybody what to do, it is about a facilitator or guide. So it's, given that we're aligned around this common vision, what do you need from me to be able to get together with your team to achieve that? And we're looking for flow. So in nature, that kind of harmony, balance, flow, all of these things, that they definitely have tensions, and there's competition, and there's all of this kind of energy flows. But essentially, what we want is for things to be working in this kind of dynamic equilibrium flow state. And there's a brilliant book called Flow that I would really recommend you checking out. Feeding the soil rather than forcing the plants. So rather that, when we're in a team context, that's thinking about, not just looking at the individual, but actually the circumstances around them, viewing your team as an ecosystem, and harnessing the power of patterns and seasons. And we're going to talk about that more a bit in a minute as well. So what I'd like you to do is just take a minute or so to think about what beliefs around complexity and control do you need to compost? And I'd love for you to share anything in the chat as well. So, when we're thinking about composting, we often use this term in our courses and with teams. What we're doing is creating the soil, the conditions for new life to emerge. But to do that, we usually need to let go of some old beliefs, habits that are preventing that kind of composting process to happen. So just have a think. And again, if you're at home watching this on a replay, then do, grab a pencil and just think about what beliefs around complexity and control do I need to compost to make my business, my organization, my team, myself more effective. If anybody wants to share, that would be lovely. I just get a break, have a sip of water. So have a think about. I was quite tempted to find a photo, you know, of a beautiful compost, you know, lovely and rotted down. But actually, when I found this photo of kind of the rotty bits, you know, the bits that have just gone past their prime and we've just chucked them on the compost heap, like that's much more realistic of this process. That actually there's a certain amount of discomfort and, you know, distaste really around kind of things, letting go of old things. Sometimes we want to hold on to them past their prime. And sometimes it feels slightly yucky to be letting go of them as well. So don't assume that this is going to be a lovely, you know, beautifully warm and fluffy process. There's a definitely an amount of discomfort involved in this. So let's see. Compost of events, activities that aren't sustainable, focus on putting energy into those that work, review and compost ones that have passed their best. That's it. So, you know, if you've invested in a new program or, you know, webinar or workshop or whatever it might be, and then, you know, eventually these things will be past their prime and you need to think about composting that. But the great thing about composting, rather than this idea of letting things go, is that compost is a source of new nutrients. So whatever you've learned from doing that process previously is going to be recycled to nourish whatever new comes along. So, you know, it's this cycling circular process. You need to be aware about the evolution of the different materials in order that the soil is balanced. Yeah, absolutely. The amount of organic waste, humidity must be balanced for microorganisms. Absolutely. So yeah, so we're not going to be putting down a load of artificial chemicals, which is essentially what businesses are doing all of the time when they try and keep their people working in that forced state with no pause, no time for rest and rejuvenation, no time for reflection, no time for kind of celebrating when things haven't gone well, or even if things have gone well. So all of this is kind of really very great analogy with that process of like forcing a load of chemical fertilizer, you know, onto this process when we need to allow it to happen much more organically. Let go of the thought of being perfect. Yeah, absolutely. This perfectionism, letting go of controlling everything. Yeah, then only we can be habitat and community. I love that. Compost, the idea of capture and reach everything and everyone. Brilliant. Not every idea has to work first time. Yeah, visit and reflect, let learning be an organic process. So yeah, that's essentially what we did when we were bringing these programs for businesses and organizations to the world. You know, we tried various iterations, we tweaked, we kind of added compost in different ways, we listened to feedback about what people wanted. And yeah, so at any point we could have, in that old mindset, kind of thought, oh, this isn't working, this is really hard work of all these sort of adaptability and change. But instead we can just feel into that as sort of a part of this adaptable process that we that is life. Being able to focus on my specific reach and level of effectiveness and not feeling like I have to do all things and be all things. Absolutely. Yeah. So composting these beliefs can, either on an individual basis or hopefully collectively as part of your team, can really, really help free up energy, resources, and allow for new potential to emerge from within your team. So your potential is like the seeds that could be, could be fertilized, but they're not quite there yet. So that's really helpful. Thank you for sharing all of those. So what guides us in regenerative practice? So we love as humans to have guide rails about stuff, and effectively nature has guide rails as well. They just happen to be kind of programmed into DNA and passed on in different kind of ways. We've also got this ability as humans to oh, sorry, I've gone back. Sorry, I'm gonna have to stop. I'm in the wrong place. Yeah, so we love guide rails, and so what we've done is, excuse me, pressing the wrong button, getting overexcited with my hands. So we love to have these sort of guide rails, and in regenerative practice there isn't any kind of one size fits all. There's no tick box solutions. So that's a key difference when you're looking at sustainability practice versus regenerative practice, that often there are tick boxes that you can fill in, and your carbon calculators, and all of those are great. It's just that they aren't what life is about. So we use those as tools rather than seeing them as the guidance, the framework overall, in general. So we also shy away from this idea that there are experts telling us what to do, and that might be experts, kind of gurus in the learning world, but it might also be within your team as well, and trying to let go of really fixed targets and outcomes. So what we do, we're guided by place and context, using living systems principles as a guide. Okay, so essentially what we've done within Think Like a Forest is, I'm a bit of a natural principles geek. I wrote a book called Think Like a Tree, The Natural Principles Guide to Life back in 2019, in which I went out and explored a huge amount of principles that people have used, inspired by living systems. And when I wanted to bring these principles to a business and an organizational context, I organize them slightly differently into these 12 strands. Other natural principles that you might have come across will fit within all of these 12 strands, but these are essentially the secrets of success for a healthy ecosystem. And I do have to acknowledge a huge debt of gratitude, of course, to disciplines such as biomimicry and permaculture, systems thinking. And then there's also regenerative leadership, regenerative economics, that all have principles. And I think there's kind of a consensus in the regenerative world that there shouldn't be one definitive set of principles that everybody should use for every context, because your context is different, and therefore the wording will change, and the things that will speak to people in slightly different ways. And of course, as I said at the beginning as well, that we've got a huge debt of gratitude to indigenous wisdom, ancient wisdom, and we have to remember that indigenous and ancient people lived by these principles anyway. They might have not have given them the same names, but essentially they were all around them in the living world. And this is wisdom that we've lost, we've forgotten. So it's always been there, and we are rediscovering it. And we're going to dig in a bit more into the strands in a minute. So the second key framework that we use in our business and organization programs are 6 systems dimensions. And this allows us to look at different wholes, if you like. So wholes as in WHOLES. So what we're looking at when we're looking at living systems is the connections and, you know, the quantity of different things. Quantity is the wrong word. The different kind of elements that, but the connections between them as ecosystems rather than as individuals. And so what we want to do is see ourselves as an ecosystem, our teams, our organizations, any land or workplace that we're involved in, our wider ecosystem. So that might be anything from our local community to our customers and stakeholders, and right out to the biosphere. And we need to keep all of these in mind when we're designing for these sort of healthy, resilient, effective organizations. And that can be quite difficult to do. So my experience of doing a lot of training myself in these regenerative disciplines is it's quite easy to go down, say, a regenerative leadership rabbit hole where you're concentrating all on yourself as a leader and then kind of forget the climate context, or vice versa. You know, many carbon courses will look at the biosphere systems dimension, but they forget that, you know, that people are actually the most important part actually in terms of lowering carbon emissions. So this allows us to sort of work across the different dimensions and see the interconnectedness. And a lot of scientists have, you know, over the time, climate scientists have kind of really despaired about how they've raised awareness about the science of climate, for example, but they've not been able to be really effective in you know, behavioral change or government change, because of course that's something that's happening more at the self team organization ecosystem level, if you see what I mean. So we need to look at complex problems in complex systems dimensional ways, and this simple framework allows us to do that in a way that appeals to those guide rails that we want as human beings to be able to kind of make sense of the world. So in a minute, what we're going to do is we're going to explore this issue of complexity using the 12 strands framework. So the rest of the session is going to be digging into, so what can we actually learn from some of these strands I'm going to pull out and think about this issue of complexity in a work context. But I just wanted to kind of anchor that into the wider context of the Regenerative Organization Fundamentals program. So we've designed it as a 4-month program, although you do actually get access to the online modules, videos and resources for life. But the 4 months is a kind of guided program where you'll have 6 live Zoom sessions with a cohort of peers, and then you know, to keep that momentum up, and then to explore some of the ideas of regenerative being as well as just what you do as a regenerative business or leader. Our Inspired by Nature network community platform and peer support is included, and then we've got a One Planet action plan where you actually map in a very organic way what your progress is throughout the course and beyond in terms of being regenerative. So you can bring in other learnings from other places, and this is kind of a whole framework that fits within. And it's a blend of theory. So we do look into the theory of kind of regenerative and how we got in this mess and all of that stuff. But it's very, very practical. So you will be really supported to put all that into action, both in terms of yourself as a leader and those personal kind of issues that we need to be thinking about, and also the practical elements of actually, you know, wanting to bring regenerative practice into the world. And yeah, here's some participants from the last cohort, and we did have quite a diverse, this is just a small snapshot, we did have really diverse group of people. We did have some men. I've just ended up with photos of just women, but you know, right from Cherry, who was a solopreneur, Optimo, they are a small medium business, tech business, and then right up to, we had like a multinational corporations come on the course, and everybody was kind of mixed up together in terms of learning from each other. And that the feedback was that that really worked. And that came out of one of the natural principles, which is integrate rather than segregate. And if you look out in, in nature, I'm looking out of my window at my woodland now, you'll see all of that, those organisms being kind of mixed up together, and that creates health and vitality. And what I think they found is that it allowed them to think differently from from the silos that they were traditionally in their businesses with. So we had everybody from kind of worker from a community garden right up to, like I say, founder of a multinational, very large corporation. And what our clients love about our frameworks, which is great because this is what we obviously set out to do, that they are easy to understand, but so making sense of that complexity means that you can dive really deeply, and you can go off in the direction that you're called to do, but it gives you an overall framework to come back to. But they also meet you where you are. So, you can come and design a regenerative business or organization from scratch, but that isn't most people's experience. You're already in it. These meet you where you are, and in fact they're a really good evaluation tool right from the start to think, okay, so this is what I'm doing well. And it's really great to hear the feedback from people on the program who said that one thing they loved was that it gave them a real confidence boost about the things that they were doing well, that they were doing regeneratively without even kind of thinking about it. And they're appropriate for all types and sizes of business and organization. And there is a lot of hope around this because, we when we open the newspaper, listen to the news, there's an awful lot of despair around climate, ecological crises, mental health and well-being crises, etc. And this does really offer a hope of a totally different paradigm rather than just a tweak to business as usual. And they cover the inner and outer dimensions, so we call that being and doing. So how you're invited to think about how you might want to change as well as what you do, and that covers you inner and also the outer dimensions of your business and organization as well. So what we're going to do is going to explore what very, very briefly, obviously, what guidance might the strands give us in a complex and changing world. That's just the view where there's a little bit more detail about each strand. You can see, there's certain different additional elements when you see that in detail. But essentially, this is what we're going to explore. And starting with the observance strand. So this is where we always start. So if you're familiar with permaculture, then you know that permaculture design always starts with observation. So if you're designing a garden, for example, so I have a diploma in applied permaculture design. I've designed many gardens, big projects, my own small holding, etc. We always start with observing what's there. The same is true of your business. You're going to get a huge amount of insight into what changes to make, but often we don't take that time to sit back and observe. We jump straight in with problem solving and solutions and suggesting to other people what should be done rather than taking that step back and observing. And what I invite you to do is watch your metaphors, when you're observing your team and yourself. So I have the Adobe photo suite thing. So I just put into it, in terms of finding photos, the word team. So the word team came out with this jigsaw. So you in your team, you're just part of a jigsaw. How does that make you feel? Is that really inspiring to feel like you're part of a jigsaw, not a whole person who's turning up for work every day with all the complexities of a human being? Another thing, Adobe came up with cogs for innovation. I mean, the best innovations that have ever happened have been from human ingenuity, sitting in the bath or going for a walk in nature and coming up with these amazing things. I mean, Einstein was a real proponent of this living systems approach, and one of the greatest innovators that the world's ever seen. So if you want innovation in your team, don't look to cogs, don't call them cogs in a machine. And in fact, I was having dinner with my daughter and her partner, who works for a huge multinational IT company. Said, "Oh, I really love my job, but I do feel like a cog in a machine." And this is not going to get the best out of this sort of enthusiastic young man. So bottom left, that's what happens when you put in the word system into a photo generator. And then the bottom right, organization, comes out of this as this hierarchical, thing with one person at the top. Does it look like a man? Yeah, definitely, because with a tie. um uh, there's all of these sort of unconscious things that we're bringing in our words and our visuals. So try and move away from that, observe them, take note of them. Don't feel guilty about them. That's how we evolve. But just try and shift your metaphors into living system metaphors. The vision and purpose strand is the second strand, and then this is where we go to next. So what we do with you in the program is explore, what is your purpose, what is your vision, and then seeing how you can align that with the vision and purpose of your organization and the people within it. So it doesn't have to be within an organization traditionally. So JK and myself did this activity when we created Think Like a Forest. We came together as collaborators. We both did our individual visions. We did our aligned vision, our joint vision for Think Like a Forest, and we saw where the alignment was, tweaked things, and then that's kind of the glue that holds you together. So what you've got then is something that's an overall vision that everybody's working towards. And it's also kind of a source of grit and energy when things get tough, because you remember why you're doing this. But the really important thing, of course, in so many organizations, this has become a gesture, something that, just a small part of the organization takes part in, and it's not, it's just stuck on a website or forgotten, and it's not alive in every day as part of the organization. And that's what needs to happen to be able to keep this alive. And sometimes, there are difficult decisions to be made off the back of this. It might be that you have people that aren't really aligned with your overall vision, but again, it's all useful information to think, are these the right people? And also so I've been talking to leaders recently, and it seems that so many organizations are still hiring for kind of expertise and experience, rather than hiring for a good fit on values and culture and that kind of thing. So it does have really profound impacts on decision making around hiring, and who's not a good fit for the organization. The third is the collaborative strand. So collaborations bring sources of energy for difficult times, and it's a source of potential. And that might be collaborations within your organization or beyond. And this is just a little snapshot of my much wider One Planet ecosystem map. So these are some of the organizations and collaborations that I'm involved with, the networks, the courses, the facilitators, and all of those things. So by mapping these connections, you can see, okay, so I really see that I need to strengthen that connection. That will make my ecosystem healthier. And then you can identify sources of potential. So you do, as part of the program, get access to the One Planet tool. And that means that you can map your ecosystem, but it also means you map your actions as well. So it means, instead of we can see this, how it maps onto the different strands and how everything joins up. And what you do is then generate a report, if you want a report then to share with the rest of your team about what you've been up to, and you can get other team members to collaborate on that as well. Now, to make the collaborative strand successful, we need to have, good communication. We need to have good cultures. We need to have psychological safety. And we need to be thinking about, again, think about feeding that soil. How can you feed that soil? So you're creating a safe space, but also a brave space for teams and individuals to bring, what they have to offer, their potential into that. So that's one way of sort of navigating that complexity of people, that by creating the so I'm sure a lot of people have got stresses and strains around the complexity of human interaction and conflict resolution, and all of the things about people, staff sickness and all of those things. Those are really complex problems. These are the exact problems that we're talking about in this context. And it's all about feeding the soil. So everything from, how do you start your meetings? Where do people meet? And how do you, what expectations are there in terms of how and when they can work? What support have they got? Adequate support in terms of IT and other systems to support them in order to thrive. So there's lots of elements to making this collaborative strand work, but essentially, getting the most out of your teams requires effort in advance and feeding that soil ongoing. The next strand is all about being in right relationship with place. So place is really important, and place can mean a physical place, but it can also be like look at context and circumstances as well. So traditionally, businesses have come up with an idea, they've trialed it in one place, and then they've said, oh yeah, it's great, it works, let's do it over here in a totally different place. And then they wonder why that it doesn't work, or it might work, it might not. But obviously the context and the place are different. So we avoid that in regenerative practice. Of course, we're always learning. So there's an accepting feedback strand. We're always learning from what's gone before. But essentially, we're looking and designing from place and context upwards, rather than taking what's worked in the past and imposing it from above. So it's growing from I'm good with hand gestures on Zoom, aren't I? But I'm even much worse when I'm in person. Feeding the soil and growing from below rather than imposing something from above. And that avoids those scaling and repeating errors. And we have holistic design processes that support with that allow you to consider all of the different elements before actually jumping in and imposing a solution. In the innovative strand, we are again creating the right soil for innovation and creativity, and encouraging that failing forward approach. So this idea that you're learning from any failures, or I do use the word failures, but I'm a massive fan of failure parties as well. So it's learning from that and seeing it as a positive experience because you've given something a go, and about empowering potential in people again. And then you get the most out of people. And innovation is effectively a very, very complex issue, because we know that bringing people together, there's this concept of emergence in living systems. So if you bring people together, then you can't predict what's going to emerge, and that's what the innovative process is about, feeding that to allow that emergence to happen in the most effective way. The adaptable strand, so this lovely photo of a tree that's been molded around a metal framework, and we can learn from nature's inherent adaptability, and again, anchoring ourselves in that vision and purpose is really helpful, but being flexible enough to let go of what's not working is often what is the sticking point, the barrier actually, in this ability to be adaptable. And moving on from that, we can also look at resilience. So there's this concept of post-traumatic growth. You can see it in forest fires, and a forest fire is devastating and certainly linked to climate. They're happening much more frequently than they would under baseline non-human global heating conditions. But essentially, these maybe on 100-year cycle forest fires in certain locations are a process of renewal, and seeds are adapted, they've evolved to take advantage of the light conditions, the fertility of the ash in the soil, as you can see in that photo, for new shoots to emerge. And so we need to be, we need to be able to recognize that these big shocks are often an opportunity to step in with something new. Only if we don't allow ourselves to become paralyzed, and only in talking about in a global context, if we're really wary that there are a huge amount of actors, the right wing is really actively working on this at the moment to actually encourage these shocks or this feeling of fear and fear and scarcity, so that they can impose their solution. And obviously that's something that we've seen previously in the Second World War, etc. So but if we were able to turn our mindset to see this as a positive opportunity, not something that's just about fear and scarcity, then we avoid being paralyzed in that situation. So we've got the value diversity strand, and in living systems, diverse ecosystems are healthy ecosystems, and each person brings their uniqueness, and we create the conditions for that unique potential to emerge. And that might be diversity in people, but it might be a diversity in opinions or ideas, or there's lots of different types of diversity. And so I just wanted to put two pictures up here. One is the picture that we would expect to see if I talked about diversity. But if I show you the picture of triplets in the bottom, what comes to mind when you think about diversity, when we haven't got those assumptions about how people look? We have to get to know them better, and we should be doing that with everybody regardless of how they look. But I put that in there just as to pose that question. Are we really getting to know people so in our organizations so that we can allow that potential to emerge? And then I'm going to close off with the seasonal and dynamic strand, which is that organizations are often trying to be in perpetual spring and summer. This is something called the adaptive cycle, this figure of 8, which is much more realistic about portraying the cycle of the seasons and growth, birth, growth, death, decay, and then recycling back round again. And we're usually starting with seeds. So if I said to you, oh, what's alive in you at the moment, you'd probably effectively be at seeds, and you'd be thinking about new ideas that you've got for your business. And we're getting to spring and it's all about growth and all of that. Actually, what I do in this process is actually start at letting go. So what do you need to let go of? What do you need to compost? What soil do you need to build to go around that cycle? Because if you think about all this beautiful diversity that we see in our ecosystems, this planet started as bare rock. So essentially we did have some growth, but it's actually the composting and the building of soil that has created, the conditions for all of this to emerge. And organizations, when they're holding so much complexity, are often out of alignment with the actual seasons as well. So, they're not allowing for times of pause and rejuvenation, and then sometimes we have to work out of alignment with the seasons, but we still will need those, ebbs and flows of different adaptive cycle elements. So I want to just remind you of this 6 systems dimensions framework. And, we often concentrate on the huge issues of our time around climate and ecological anxiety and those huge complex issues. But to remind you that you've already begun this process of rippling out. You've started with that self. It means that by thinking about this regenerative process, these regenerative mindsets, you've got more capacity to grow your business and have a more harmonious and effective team. And you don't need to do it all. We provide you in this program with a comprehensive framework, but essentially this is just like life. You do the bits that you're called to with support, with guidance, with support from other people. And that is that natural organic process that happens, but you've got these frameworks to anchor yourself within. And what the factors are that we've identified for success are these easy to understand principles and frameworks. So they've got a huge amount of depth, but essentially they allow you to step into that process. Access to tools and resources that you can adapt to your circumstances. So again, not a one size fits all approach, but JK and I are massively regenerative squirrels. So we gather up things to signpost you to. There is a huge amount of free resources in our weekly regenerative business newsletter. In the Inspired by Nature network, you're invited to join for free. There's free resources in there. And on the website, and then we've got a free download that'll be coming out. So just look out for lots of stuff, tools and resources. And then it's really useful. Everybody who goes on a regenerative journey says it's really useful to have a network of fellow regenerative practitioners. And I've certainly experienced that from the courses that I've been on, learning from each other, and then experience guides. So JK couldn't be with us today, but she says hi, and that's a photo of her. So she and I run this program together. And so what we invite from you is a curiosity about new ways of being and doing, and something that you've already stepped into today, which is a willingness to let go of outdated habits, mindsets, and cultures. But of course, what we're giving you is an invitation to step into some really exciting ones. I mean, one thing I think about the difference between sustainability and regenerative, I mean, one thing is sustainability usually only focuses on the external environment rather than the people, whereas the regenerative is the whole package. But the other thing is that people get really excited about regenerative. Regenerative is about creating life. It's about what we evolved to do, which is create life and create conditions conducive to life, to grow really good, healthy stuff. Whereas sustainability, is often the message around it is, what do we need to lose to be able to live successfully on this planet? So it is a very different feel in my experience, and that's one reason I love it so much and want to bring it to the world. So we would love to help you and your team. The fundamentals program is for either individual leaders or team members, or we have had sort of maybe 2 or 3 people from an team or an organization come together. That's been really useful for them to work through the course and the materials together. Or if you have a whole organization or a big team, then we have what's called our adventure program, where we take you through the same materials, but we bespoke the live sessions to your team in your organization, and that can be either on Zoom or in person. Whereas the fundamentals is an all online program, which you're welcome to attend from anywhere in the world. The materials, some of the materials do tend to, where there is a regional element to them, they do tend to have a UK focus, but actually all the frameworks and most of the materials are relevant wherever you are in the world. And I love having Zoom coffee and chat with people. So do reach out if you've got any questions after the end of this webinar to do that. And then there's £100 discount code as well, because we're being super generous. But all the details will come out in a follow-up email. And it's, if you go on to thinklikeatree.co.uk/fundamentals, you will find it anyway. And there's all the dates for the next cohort, which signs up by the deadline of the 1st of March, and the sessions start on the 5th and 6th of March. So we're coming to the end. We just want to allow time for things to settle with you. We've got sort of a little while for questions, but I'm going to stop the recording now and just kind of let that settle, what you've heard today.